But we begin with the action on the impeachment probe against Donald Trump. Hearing from key witnesses, another new person says they will testify, and what looks like a Stonewall cracking as this Ukraine scandal engulfs Donald Trump's presidency. A fourth Giuliani associate arrested this morning, taken into federal custody at JFK Airport by the FBI. The man you see is linked to the other Ukrainian businessmen who have those ties to Giuliani indicted. All four due in court tomorrow. Now, CNN is reporting the criminal probe of Giuliani also now includes, according to CNN's reporting, what they call counterintelligence concerns. Now, that's a big deal because it could mean there are national security implications to all of this, and it also means potential charges. Donald Trump seemed to turn on Giuliani. Then he seemed to embrace him this weekend. And just on cue, here he is distancing himself from him today.
Rudy was seeking that corruption, and I think there's nothing wrong with seeking that corruption.
But
Did you have Steve?
Rudy registers a foreign lobbyist.
I don't know what he did. I don't know. That's up to him. That you have to ask. Excuse me. No, you have to ask Rudy those questions. Don't ask me.
You have to ask Rudy. Anyone who's been a lawyer for Donald Trump knows that's not the greatest sign. Meanwhile, Democrats are asking Mike Pompeo's former advisor about what was an abrupt resignation, suspicious given everything going on. And that individual, his name's Michael McKinley, is testifying that he saw this plot, these politics, as undercutting his foreign policy obligations, and he resigned over the ousting, which Rudy Giuliani and others had pushed for, of the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine in the Trump administration. Meanwhile, the person who took over as acting ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, is on his way to testify. He is another key witness. Remember, there's a lot of names here, but he is the one where if you don't remember his name, I bet you remember his text exchange because he talked to Donald Trump's handpicked ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland. Mr. Taylor was the one who wrote, "It is, quote, crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign." And is the pressure getting to Donald Trump? Well, on a set of different issues, we are seeing clues because Speaker Pelosi just described a potential, what she sees as a kind of a meltdown today after the United States House passed this resolution condemning the president's decision to withdraw from Syria.
Go ahead,
What we witnessed on the part of the president was a meltdown. Sad to say.
He was insulting, particularly to the speaker. She kept her cool completely, but he called her a third-rate politician. This was not a dialogue. It was sort of a diatribe, a nasty diatribe.
I'm joined now by Matt Miller, who worked at the DOJ during the Obama and Holder administration, Maya Wiley from SDNY, and the Daily Beast, Betsy Woodruff Swan. Good evening, everyone. Matt, given all the interbranch interplay and something you've dealt with when sometimes agencies have reasons they push people from testifying or how they testify, what do you see here in what is widely being described as a Stonewall crumbling?
I think the most important thing that's happened over the past week is we've seen that there are a number of people from the administration who have decided to put either patriotism or self-interest over protecting Donald Trump. And look, people come forward for different motives. I think there's some people, Bill Taylor is probably going to be one of them, who will be ordered by the administration not to testify, who don't care. You know, George Kent yesterday, the State Department official, came and testified despite a State Department directive not to do so. And I think both of them will do so because what they saw inside the administration, they very much disagree with, and they see it as their patriotic duty to come forward. And I think there are other people, Kurt Volker is one of them, George Sondland is another, who see themselves being fingered as having key liability in this plot, as being part of the people trying to carry out the president's corrupt wishes. And they want to get in and tell their side of the story to make sure that when this story is written, they're not the fall guy for Donald Trump.
Yeah, and you talk about the fall people. I mean, Betsy, what we see here is, to the extent the idea was to keep this plot under wraps, it was actually too widespread, too perhaps, I don't want to say sophisticated, but it had too many moving parts to keep it under wraps. And a lot of these people are now saying, hey, I got to tell the story. To Matt's point, I want to read from some of this reporting because there's so many different strands tonight. The former ambassador and advisor, Fiona Hill, talking about Mr. Sondland, who was initially quoting and kind of defending, allegedly, the Trump view of this. And she says, look, Sondland she saw as a national security risk, describing him, the Trump donor turned ambassador, as metaphorically driving in an unfamiliar place with no guardrails and no GPS, Betsy.
That's right. And part of the reason that this is seen so widely throughout the Trump administration is that Rudy Giuliani's influence project was wide-ranging. He wasn't just reaching out to the president, but to folks throughout government. And everyone who he talked to about this particular undertaking is now, whether they like it or not, wrapped up in this investigation. And part of the reason that we're seeing so many of these folks come forward, including people like Sondland, who have been political allies of the president, is that they're having to think, for perhaps the first time in this administration, about life after Trump.
So
and they're realizing that this is a
that.
historic moment.
Walk us through then your point that there's all these diplomats. Some of them are just career people, which means we expect them to do their level best. Some of them, like Mr. Sondland, has a diplomatic job, ambassador, but you're saying he's a Trump guy and he's turning?
What we know about Sondland is that he made a very generous contribution to Trump's inaugural fund. I believe it was $1 million donation, and he's somebody who came into the State Department without foreign policy experience. The fact that he, to an extent, is pushing back against this administration's direction in order, according to all reports and based on what members of Congress think right now, in order to testify as part of this inquiry, indicates that for him in this moment, being on the record, even if it's behind closed doors to these impeachment investigators, is more important than staying in President Trump's good graces. And that's part of this shift that a lot of these folks are having, where they have to think about what is life after Trump going to be like, and whether they like it or not, what is history's view of them going to be? Well,
and that's a high-level statement you're making, but I don't think you're being at all dramatic, Maya. We're talking about people who, again, to take a step back and not prejudging what we'll learn from the probe, some of these are people who, like the folks you've worked with at the Southern District, give years or decades to public service. They are not the ones jumping in front of TV cameras. They're not the ones giving the first statement. I've mentioned on this show before, our review of a lot of these folks is they err on the side of caution, not testifying if they can honor a legitimate request. But some of them are saying these aren't legitimate requests. There is a crime fraud exception in most of the privilege issues. And it's time to go into Congress, even if it means they might not even get another term in any Republican administration, even a quote unquote more traditional one.
Absolutely. I think there comes a time in every public servant's career where they have to choose between the law and the Constitution and what they took the job to do versus currying political favor. And for most of them, it sounds like, and this was true of Fiona Hill as well, that they did the best they could with what the job was and what the circumstances were seriously troubled by it. As we know from the whistleblower, went through the proper channels to lodge and register those concerns. They didn't go outside of channels. They didn't
leak,
They didn't leak.
Yeah.
They did what was obligated of them to do. And, what the part of the problem here is public servants should not be punished for doing what they're supposed to do, which is serve the public interest.
Yeah. When you think about that, Matt, take a listen to Joe Biden, who figures into this in more than one way, as we all know, talking about what he views as a thug operation.
Rudy Giuliani, the president, and his thugs have already proven that they, in fact, are flat lying. What we have to do now is focus on Donald Trump. I've released 21 years of my tax returns. Even Richard Nixon released his tax returns. Mr. President, release your tax returns or shut up.
Matt?
I think the former vice president is getting at two very important points there. One is the really, the word he used is thuggish way that the president has run the government to try to take every instrument of government power and use it not to serve America's best interest, but his own personal political interests, something we've not seen from a president really since Richard Nixon, at least in this scope. And the second is just the blatant hypocrisy coming from the White House, where you hear you hear the White House accusing the former vice president of being corrupt, accusing his son of trying to profit from the fact that his dad was the vice president. When you have Trump personally profiting from his time in office, because he hasn't divested his own interests, and his son's going around and signing deals in foreign countries after the president saying he wouldn't do that as long as he was president. So I think you see the vice president making two of those very important points, and I think he's right to do that.
Betsy and Maya, and with the little time we have left, I'd like both of you to speak to what are the most important remaining questions for these witnesses, because before you know it, it's Thanksgiving, and the Congress has to decide when it can, if it wants to be legitimate and fair, say they have enough evidence that they're either going to go or not go when it comes to articles of impeachment. First, Betsy.
One really important question is whether the State Department issued any threats toward current State Department officials about whether or not they'd face repercussions if they testified. Of course, we don't know that that happened, but if that did, and if any of these folks have had concerns about losing their pensions or their salaries, that's something that would be really significant. So that's something that I expect investigators to be asking and to keep an eye out for.
And I think the question of what did Trump know? What conversations, if any, are people aware that happened with Donald Trump himself? I think there really is enough already that Congress could vote articles of impeachment today. But that question is an important one for the American public.
Yeah, it's really striking because it has come so fast and there's so much going on, perhaps a thing we say a lot around here, but it is very unusual to have this many senior people, advisors to the president, diplomats, and the national security advisor, at least according to other people's quoting of him, all weighing in short order about this plot. Betsy Woodruff, Maya Wiley, Matt Miller, thanks so much. Betsy Woodruff Swan, I should say, thanks so much to each of you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.